Hi, I'm your host, Laura Nichols, and this is a note from your coach from me, Queen of the Pivot, to you, badass human. This show is designed as a quick dose of unfiltered motivation to empower you to create the life you want to be living, one of authenticity and alignment. It investigates the power of the pivot and helps create understanding of the human journey, all while sharing tales of pivots from my sometimes ridiculous human experience, as well as my 20 years of experience in working with other humans on growth and change. If you are interested in leveling up your life, stay tuned. A note from your coach starts now. Hello, my loves. This is Laura Nichols, also known as Queen of the Pivot, and you are listening to Notes from Your Coach on Transformation Talk Radio. For now, this is actually my final show of the season. So thank you for sticking with me, but it will come out at the regular time on the first Monday of the month. So thanks for sticking with me. We're going to spend today sort of talking about the last season, what we learned, what we got out of it, kind of what we talked about, and try to tie it up in a nice little bow, which is funny because we know that that's not really how things work, right? When I was younger, I used to love the idea. Let's be honest, I still love the idea of wrapping things up in a nice little bow. But the reality is that's just not really a fact of life. This show is a lot about pivoting and what that looks like. And that is sort of the opposite of wrapping things up in a nice little bow. So at the start of the season, right, like I may have had a plan, a really nice, structured, organized plan, maybe with outlines and themes. And I had a vision of how things were going to unfold. And then reality sort of comes in and says, oh, that's so cute. Here's the thing about plans. They're great. Planning is important, setting goals, understanding how you could get there. But when they come in contact with real life, that's when things change, right? I'm sure we've all been there. You start something, it could be a project, a goal, a big change in your head. It's going to go perfectly. Smooth sailing. You're really motivated, you're inspired and ready, and then boom, right? Life hands you a twist or just something that you didn't see coming. And you're sort of standing there going, now what? Like this wasn't part of the deal, right? So when you think about things like planning a podcast or running a business or raising a family, right? We have ideas about how things are going to be, but reality and circumstances are sort of a changer. They can change everything for you. So I think I started this season thinking that I'd have this clean, linear conversation about growth, success, mindset. Um, and then reality is just such a great reminder that growth is messy, right? Change is inevitable. And no one, literally no one, even life coaches, can get from point A to B without some unexpected detours. And honestly, that's what the season was about. So let's take a little bit of time to look, review, and rewind to talk about what we learned this season. So we started out talking about the power of the pivot, which is sort of on brand for me, right? Like I talk about how I help my clients working through pivots, major life pivots, and what that's all about. And so that's sort of kind of the umbrella for the show. It's the umbrella for what I talk about in general. But we started out under the umbrella of looking at pivots, talking about authenticity, right? Like, what does it mean to be authentic? And basically, with the idea that being authentic just means being yourself, right? Just be you, it's easy. But the thing is, authenticity is actually not as easy as we like to make it out to be. It's easy to say, but when you start to feel every feeling, even the uncomfortable stuff, start understanding that your feelings are your thermometer to tell you something, then standing on your own and being your real self can be a struggle, right? Because sometimes it means not going the same direction as everybody else. Um, you can't be your real self if you're just busy pretending that things don't hurt, right? You can't be fully you if you're constantly suppressing the parts of yourself that feel messy, uncertain, or not good enough. And so, like I said, things don't get to be wrapped in a tiny, cute little box with a tiny bow because that's not authenticity. We are messy, right? There are times when we don't have the energy to do what we thought we were going to have the energy to do. Um, Authenticity is not just about self-expression. It's about self-acceptance, even when that self is a work in progress, right? So when we understand that authenticity is not just this cute little saying, but it is an all in looking at light, looking at the shadows, looking at all of you and being able to accept it, even while you're trying to grow and change. That's a tall order, right? Then we moved into on the season talking about goals and resistance, right? And that one was a real eye opener. A lot of us believed that once we set a goal, if it was meant for us, it would just feel right. It would feel natural. But the reality is that's not the case because sometimes, all the time, in all honesty, we come across resistance. And resistance is just part of the goal game, right? Fear, that procrastination, that little voice that's whispering, what if I fail? That's your brain trying to keep you safe, right? And so resistance, while we think if we have this goal, if we are doing something with purpose that is to our soul the right thing to do, it meets our why, it's the thing that gets us up in the morning and we still feel resistance, sometimes we think that that means no. But the reality is it's just our brain telling us to that it's a little bit scared about what's going to happen, right? Resistance isn't a reason to stop. It's a sign that you're stretching beyond your comfort zone. And let's be real, if your comfort zone had all the answers, you wouldn't be searching for growth in the first place, right? In order to grow and change, you have to feel uncomfortable, right? And then we talked about, we talked about endurance versus sprinting, right? A lot of us believe that success is about speed. How fast can I get there? How quickly can I make something happen? And we talked about the fact that sprinting might get us a quick result, but endurance is what actually changes your life in the long run. Because the reality is motivation fades, excitement dies down. Eventually, discipline is what has to take the wheel. Endurance is about keeping the promises that you've made to yourself, even after the mood you made them in passed. Ooh, I'm going to repeat that again because that is super important to hear. Endurance is really about keeping promises that you made to yourself, even after the mood that you made them in has passed. And that, y'all, that is hard to do when you are not feeling like doing it, when you're not feeling like getting up and putting your tennis shoes on because you promised yourself you were going to go work out, right? And still doing it anyway, that is the game changer, right? And then we talked about manifesting in action, right? I love a good vision board. I love an affirmation. There's brain science behind those things as to why they work. But at the end of the day, manifestation is not about magic. It's belief plus effort, right? Wishing for something is really nice. Working for it, however, that's where the magic happens, right? The universe will meet you halfway, but you still have to show up and do the work. So, in other words, we started with one story and we ended up with a completely different book, right? And isn't that how life is? The irony in all of this is I did put out a second book in the middle of the season. And so I started with one book and wrote a different one. And my plan is to continue doing so. So this is just how life is. If you start out thinking you're writing one kind of story, and before you know it, there's a plot twist and you're in a completely different genre, right? It's the idea that, depending on how something's written, you could be in a drama or a comedy. It just how depends how you look at things. We make plans to eat healthy for the week, all that meal prepping on Sunday in the little containers, like you're gonna win an adulting award. And then Wednesday hits, and suddenly you're eating cereal over the sink, questioning all of your life choices. It happens to the best of us. We've all been there, right? The real power isn't about having a flawless plan. It's in being flexible enough to adapt when things don't go as expected. And that is why I talk so much about pivots, right? Because life happens. It's going to come, it's going to switch things up on you. And the question is, what happens when it comes? And even more importantly, when you are making the decision to make a pivot, what does that look like? Right. So I want to turn to you for a second. I want you to think back on the season. If you've been here since episode one, or maybe you just jumped in, what's one belief, mindset, or habit that's shifted for you? Right? What did you think at the beginning, and how does it look different than now? Right? Maybe through this, you realized that you needed to slow down. Maybe you recognize resistance as part of the process instead of the reason to quit. Maybe you started showing up for yourself in a way that you weren't before. Whatever it is, I really want you to sit with it for a second. Um, if you've learned anything from this season, I hope it's that growth isn't all about having all the answers, but it's about willing to change the question, right? When you look at your life and you investigate your life, are you willing to make these changes, make these small pivots? We have the answers to create the life that we want to be living, right? We don't have to leave it up to other people. Now, is growth hard? It can be, right? Is change difficult? Sure. But when we realize it's just part of the game that we're playing, it takes a little bit of the pressure off, right? Once we realize that resistance to growth is our brain's way of keeping us safe, it normalizes it. There are so many ways to get the life that we want to live, but showing up authentically, being in it for the long haul, the endurance, and knowing that resistance is normal are three of the biggest mindsets that you have to have going into these major changes. So we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to continue on and talk about the power of the pivot, why change is inevitable, and what to do when it happens. So we're going to finish out the season strong, looking at that, the power of the pivot, because you know I love a good pivot. See you back in a few. All right, my loves, we're back. So we talked about everything that we thought we knew at the beginning of the season versus what we actually learned. So what makes all of those lessons possible? I bet you can guess it, but in case you haven't been able to, it's the pivot, right? The pivot is one of those words that people love to throw around, especially in business or personal development or basketball, ironic, if that's your thing, right? But it's honestly one of the most important skills that you can develop in life. Because guess what? If you've been in this game for a while, you know that nothing goes according to plan, right? People die, health happens, politics comes into play, natural disasters, other people changing their minds about things, right? Circumstances around us change all the time, and we only have control of ourselves. So you're gonna set plans, you're gonna create goals, and then you're going to realize that things might need to change along the way. Maybe what you thought of wasn't exactly what you wanted in the end, right? You're going to you're going to chase a dream, and then you're going to run into a wall that you may not have seen coming, right? Just as an example, like even I started my business about 2.5 years ago now. And I've talked about it before, but it's so much work to own your own business. And in the end, being a single mom, I came to a place where I was relying so much on my business to be an adult when it was still a baby that I had to pivot, right? And so a couple months ago, I went back to school counseling and took a job there. I didn't see that coming. The job landed in my lap. And I'm perfect. I'm so happy that I took it, but that was a shift. That was a pivot that I had to do, right? So when I hit the wall of, let's say, needing more financial security, right? I had to pivot. And by pivoting to find a job that I loved and that was able to help me relieve some of the stress on my business, was exactly what I had to do, right? So then what? So then you commit to a new path, And then somewhere where along the way, you realize the path doesn't fit you anymore. And this is all okay and normal. You are allowed to pivot as many times as you want. What you don't want to do is pivot just because something gets hard, right? Sometimes you have to move through the resistance to continue moving along in the journey, right? So when you're on a path and you realize the path doesn't fit you anymore, um, let's say at the beginning of my time owning my business, I thought I was going one direction, right? And then I realized that maybe that wasn't the what fit me or my purpose. So you have two choices in a moment like that. One, you can stay stuck, right? Keep forcing something that doesn't work because you're afraid to change or because you're being super stubborn, right? Or you can pivot, adapt, shift, and trust the changing direction doesn't mean failure, it means growth, right? I mean, if you think about life like a river, right? If you're looking at something like the Grand Canyon, years and years of water carving out this beautiful canyon, right? The water moved the path of least resistance. It continually changed and ebbed and flowed. And that is what we have to do. Be like water, right? Find the place where you can move into and change. Don't keep beating your head against the wall. As long as you are sticking to your why, your overall direction in life that you want to be going, if that's still working for you, then pivot and find a new way to get where you want to go. Pivoting can be uncomfortable. It can feel really vulnerable, right? Sometimes it feels like you're admitting that you were wrong before. I've had so many life pivots, and I have to deal with that feeling of discomfort of, well, if I'm changing my mind now, are people going to look at me like I have egg on my face because I'm doing something different? But guess what? It really doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. It matters what you think. And this comes back to being authentic to yourself. And if you look at yourself in the mirror and say, this is truth for me, this is authenticity for me, then it doesn't really matter. The people who are meant to come alongside you, they're going to continue to be alongside you. And the people that aren't meant to be on that path with you as you're going and changing, they're going to go, right? And that's okay. Yes, grief comes from that. Yes, you have to say goodbye, but this is your life. This is the life that you are creating, the one that you want to be living. And so I think a lot of times people are afraid to change because they're afraid of what other people are going to think of them. The irony in all of this is when I told one of my friends that I was looking at taking a job to soften, the stress on my business financially. Her first go ahead was, you know, what other people thought. And frankly, I didn't care what other people thought about me taking a job or going back to school counseling because I had sworn I was never going to go back to school counseling because my mind was on survival, right? Like paying for food, electricity, making sure that I was being a responsible mom and I could pay the bills for my kids. But it was interesting that that was her first thought was what are other people going to think? And frankly, I didn't care. However, I do recognize that what people think and how they view you when you're taking a pivot is important, right? To a lot of people. And it's a reason why a lot of people don't make the change. But again, this is your life. You get to create the life you want. So why else do we hesitate? Why is pivoting so hard, right? We hesitate when we know something isn't working, but we hesitate to make the change, right? Have you ever stayed in a job or a relationship or a commitment way longer than you should have because you've invested so much time in it? Right. That the sunk cost fallacy, right? That our brains hate to admit that we might have put time, energy, and money into the wrong thing. So instead of cutting our losses or moving, we double down. I have totally done that, especially if we're talking about relationships. Like I've already come this far, so I might as well stick it out, right? But the reality is, if you made a wrong turn while you were driving, would you just keep going because you've already driven 5 miles in the wrong direction? No, you would turn around and get on the right path, right? Life is the same way. If you're going down a path and you realize it's not the right path for you, you turn. It's crazy that we decide to stick to it out of stubbornness, right? But again, I've been there. Life works the same way as driving. If you turn down the wrong path, you don't drive for 100 miles because you're committed to this direction. You turn around and go the right way, right? Another reason that we find pivoting hard, right? Fear of judgment. If we change directions, are people going to think we're flaky? Will they think that we've failed? But listen, people are always going to have opinions. At the end of the day, you're the one who has to live with your decisions, right? And let me be really clear about this. There's nothing admirable about being stubborn at your own expense. There's a time and place for stubbornness, right? When you are stubborn to get up and continue moving towards your goal, right? But if you're being stubborn and it's affecting you in a negative way because of you're scared of what people think of you, that's lunacy, right? Have you ever tried to wear an outfit that just doesn't fit anymore? You sit there the whole day and you're tugging at it, readjusting, pretending it's fine, but you know that you're uncomfortable, right? That's what happens when we refuse to pivot. We try to squeeze into situations that frankly no longer fit us. And then we wonder why we're miserable, right? It's like going to work wearing pants that are too tight for you and you have to sit in them all day and you're constantly messing with them. Why do we do that to ourselves, right? So, as you're thinking through your life and you're thinking about what doesn't fit anymore, I want you to think about what is something you're forcing that's not working, right? Where are you holding on to something not because you love it, but because you're afraid to let it go? And more importantly, what would it look like to give yourself permission to make that pivot, right? The moment that we stop resisting change, that's the moment where we actually start growing, where the roots start to move, you start to bend in the right direction towards the sun, right? If we stay stuck, nothing's going to change. I had this conversation with my teenager, and we were talking about study habits. And I said, dude, you've been doing the same thing for 3 years now, and clearly it's not working for you. Like, at what point are you going to realize that you need to change the way you're doing things to get the result that you want? He hasn't made the change yet, but we'll see what happens. But it's true. And we don't just do that as teenagers, we do that as adults, right? Think about those of you that are serial daters, right? You start to date the same person you dated 6 months ago. Not actually the same person, but a person who's very similar to the relationship that you had before that didn't work, right? If we continue to do the same thing over and over, nothing's going to change. At some point, you have to get uncomfortable and step out of that pathway that we've been walking on forever to walk onto the pathway that hasn't been created yet. Is it uncomfortable? Yes. Is it hard work? For sure, because it's a new path. But if you don't like the direction you're going, if you don't want to go and end up at the same place you ended up 6 months before, you have to make that change. You can't keep doing it. So take a minute to think about your life. Where are you unhappy? Where are things feeling tired? Where are you wearing an outfit that is too tight, doesn't fit, out of style, that's making you spend all day readjusting your clothing? That's the starting point. That's when you need to start to dream. What do you actually want? What do you want your outfit to actually look like? What do you want it to feel like? Right? And then start to create the change. Start to think about what you need to do to make that change happen. That is my challenge for you as you're listening to this podcast today. We're going to be right back. We're going to take another break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about how to pivot with purpose, what it looks like to realize that you want to change and then how to make it actually happen. Be right back. All right, welcome back, my loves. We are here rounding out the end of the season, back to where we started, which is talking about what I love to talk about, which is the pivots. And why am I so passionate about pivots? Well, pivot's just a fancy word for major life change, right? Like the people that I work with are typically clients who are really uncomfortable. They don't love where they're at. They're not happy. Something needs to change. Sometimes my clients don't even know what that is. Sometimes they come to me saying, I don't know what needs to change. I either need to quit my job or leave my husband. I'm not sure what it is. Or sometimes they understand that they're in unhappiness of their own making, right? I've had clients who have left jobs, started new careers, were unhappy in their current job, loved the corporation they worked for, but wanted to move up into something higher, right? Or had moved across the country, didn't love where they were living, and were trying to figure out the next step, right? The people I work with want major life pivots, but they don't know how to get there. They just know that they're really miserable where they're at. And the reason I'm so uh excited about pivots is because I've had my own major life pivots in my life a lot of times. Whether it was dismantling religion or changing careers or coming out later in life or going through divorce or moving to a new state, starting a business. Major life pivots are an amazing energy, right? Like if you can use the energy of change, it changes everything in your life. Every major life pivot you have affects everything else in your life. It's not just that. And so typically when I'm working with clients one-on-one, while we're looking at the major life pivot, really we're going a lot deeper than that. What are your mindsets about yourself that have kept you where you are? Where do you want to go? Why do you want to move there? And what's holding you back? And so I work with clients one-on-one for about 12 weeks because that's how long it takes to make a major change, sometimes longer, but a minimum of 12 weeks. And if you don't know me on a personal level and you haven't heard me say it, my love really is I have a secret love for teenagers. That's why I went back into school counseling. I love helping them get to the next thing. So if you're interested in working with me one-on-one, all my information is on my website, notesfromyourcoach.com. You can go there. You can sign up to have a free consult with me. We can talk about where you're at, what's not working, what you want to change. And I'd be glad to partner with you to make the next thing happen, to really create the life you want to be living. And so that's why I love pivots so much. So let's get into it. We've talked about how pivots are inevitable, especially as life gives you, you know, various circumstances. But how do we do it by making the right moves? How do we actually pivot with purpose, right? It's necessary, it's inevitable. Growth often means detours, right? It's gonna take you on a funny little quest. We get it. But how do you do this without losing your mind, right? Because when we hear the word pivot and take it as a free pass to impulsively change direction every 5 seconds, like I'm gonna start a business in the morning and by lunchtime you're gonna be moving to Costa Rica and by dinner you're gonna say, forget it all, I'm going back to school for marine biology, right? If that's you, there's no judgment, right? For some of us who are neurodivergent, have ADHD, that's just called a day. But that's not a pivot, right? That is chaos, right? A pivot isn't just about switching up things for the sake of switching it up. It's about making intentional, strategic shifts that align with growth. So let's break it down, right? 3 steps to pivoting with purpose, meaning something big has to change. So how do we make it happen, right? First is checking your why, right? Before you make any major change, you have to pause, take a breath, and ask yourself, why am I pivoting? So typically in coaching, I don't ask why a lot. Most of my questions are what, because why often sounds pretty judgmental. But when it comes to things like this, your why, that is the get you out of bed at night, pit in your stomach. What am I breathing for? Right. So, one exercise I love to have clients do with themselves, I don't even necessarily have to do it with them, is I'll make them, I like to call it like the toddler game, right? You sit with yourself and you ask yourself why, and then you answer the question. And then you ask yourself why again. And then you answer the question, right? And you are going to end up going deep enough to get to that gut wrenching answer, right? The thing that makes you cry when you think too long about it, right? So there's different reasons why we change direction. Why am I pivoting? One is we're evolving, right? We've outgrown something. It no longer aligns with our values, our goals, or who we're becoming. Because again, here's your permission. You're allowed to grow and change, right? Another reason that we change direction is because we're avoiding discomfort, right? Something is getting hard, we're feeling resistance, and instead of pushing through it, we tell ourselves, maybe this isn't for me. All right, so there's a very big difference between those two reasons for changing directions, right? One is we're evolving, we're growing. The other is we don't want to be uncomfortable, right? So I want you to think about that discomfort. If the discomfort is coming from resistance that's normal, right? Like, because growth and change, you have to push through the hard thing. If you're growing and changing like a seed, right? You're pushing your roots through hard soil and you're pushing up the stem through the hard soil as well. That's going to be hard and it's going to create resistance. But if you're changing just to avoid discomfort, right? Like not having that hard conversation, like switching, deflecting, making that change, then you're not going to end up creating the life you want to be living. It's just impossible for that to happen. So I say this with love, but if you pivot every time something gets hard, you're not pivoting, you're running. And there's a big difference between pivoting with purpose and quitting out of fear. Sometimes discomfort is a sign that you need to pivot, but sometimes it's a sign that you need to keep going. I know that's frustrating. So the question is, how do you tell the difference? Here's the gut check, right? If you imagine staying on your current path, does it feel right in your body or wrong in your body? Does it feel heavy, like maybe misalignment? Or does it just feel hard, like you're being stretched in a way that's uncomfortable but necessary? Right? What voice comes up? I know for me, when something feels hard, like I'm being stretched, tend to get a little whiny. Like, oh, why does it have to be so hard? This is difficult, right? And I allow myself to be whiny Laura sometimes, right? Sometimes we need a moment to feel a little like childlike, right? And be given that moment to be hard. But if it's I know that it matches with my why and it's just hard in the moment, I tell myself it's temporary. This hard is temporary. Keep going. You've done hard things before, you know, but you got to get used to being able to understand the difference between those two, right? One is a sign to pivot. If something doesn't feel right in your body and it's misaligned, that's a sign to pivot. The other one just feels hard, that's a sign to keep going, right? And so practicing, learning the difference is what's going to help you to like learn how to make decisions that are not out of fear, right? When I first came out, gosh, several years ago now, I told myself that I would work really, really hard to make decisions based on alignment and not out of fear, right? Because when we make decisions out of fear, it's typically not within alignment for who we are and what we want in life. Usually it's just us trying to stay safe. And I'm telling you that choosing safety is 9 times out of 10 not going to lead you to the life that you want to be living, right? I'm not talking about jumping out of a plane without a parachute, right? I'm talking about the choices we're making to create the life that we want to be living. All right, so step one was check your why, right? Step two is make a plan, but stay flexible, right? So you know it's time to pivot. What now? A pivot doesn't mean that you're burning everything to the ground, starting over. Although I have done that before. It doesn't mean you walk into your boss's office and throw your resignation letter on the desk. Although I've also done that. It doesn't mean you impulsively break up, move states, delete your social media, and go off the grid. I've never impulsively broken up, but yeah, it means you adjust your approach, right? You're thinking about it like a GPS, right? Somewhere you hit traffic, your GPS doesn't say, well, I guess you're not going to get there. It might say, let's go this way instead. Let's avoid the traffic, right? The destination doesn't change, just the way you get there does. So maybe your original plan was to build a business in one industry, but you now realize that your strengths and your why are better suited somewhere else. That's a pivot, right? Maybe you thought you wanted to be in a certain job, but now you realize it's not the right fit. That is a pivot. Maybe you thought that, the person that you were with was going to be the person that you were going to end up the rest of your life with. And then as you grew and changed, they didn't grow with you. That's a pivot, right? The key is you're still moving forward. You're not giving up, you're just adjusting your approach. But also, you have to stay flexible, right? A pivot is not a one-time decision, it's an ongoing process. You might think you're shifting one way and then life's like, oh, here's a plot twist. And that's okay. The goal isn't to have all the answers. The goal is to keep adjusting as you learn more about yourself. That's the whole point of all of this, right? Step 3, trust yourself. This is the hardest part because pivoting means that you're stepping into the unknown. It means that admitting the plan that you originally had is no longer the right plan for you. And you know what's terrifying about that? It means you have to rely on yourself, right? Not a rigid plan, not a 5-year checklist, you. And if that freaks you out a little bit, I get it. I've been there because learning to trust ourselves feels risky, especially when you're used to outsourcing your decisions and relying on other people, right? We want guarantees. We want certainty. We want someone to say, yes, this is 100% the right move. But let me tell you something. You have adapted before, you will adapt again. Think about all the times that you've had to adjust or shift or figure out something on the fly. You did it. Even when you didn't feel ready, even when you doubted yourself, you still figured it out. And you will do that again. Because every time you pivot towards alignment, you get closer to the life you're actually meant to be living. So here's what I want you to sit with today. Where in your life do you need that pivot? Where have you been forcing something, not because you love it, but because you're afraid to change? And more importantly, what's one step you can take this week to shift towards something that actually fits you? It doesn't have to be drastic. It doesn't have to be a burning the house down situation. Maybe it's a conversation. Maybe it's reevaluating a goal. Maybe it's just giving yourself permission to change your mind. Whatever it is, take that step. Because when you give yourself permission to pivot, you open the door to everything you're actually meant for. We'll be right back. All right, my loves, welcome back to our final segment of our final episode of this first season. So let's talk about the payoff of the pivot, right? What are our final takeaways as we wrap down the season? What does a pivot actually give you? We talked about a lot about what we learned this season. We talked about the fact that change is inevitable. We've covered how to pivot with purpose, how to make the intentional shifts instead of just running in circles. Now let's talk about why all of that matters. At the end of the day, pivoting isn't about changing directions just for the heck of it, right? It's about setting yourself up for sustainable success, whatever that means to you, whatever it means to you to be creating the life you want to be living. That is why we pivot, right? I know that sustainable success is one of those phrases that sounds very polished and motivational. So, like, what does it actually mean? The biggest benefit of pivoting is that you stop wasting energy on things that aren't meant for you. I want you to think about that for a second. How much energy do we pour into things that just no longer serve us? And we just do it because we get up and we're doing the grind every day. How many times do we keep pushing, forcing, grinding our way forward, not because it's right, but because we don't want to admit that it's time to shift? We stay in jobs we hate. We hold on to old versions of ourselves that don't work for us anymore. We keep chasing goals that don't fit anymore just because they used to make sense. And at some point, they became safe in our heads, right? Here's the thing though, when we refuse to pivot, when you refuse to let go of things that are clearly not working, you're blocking yourself from the right opportunities. And I get it. It's scary. Change can be terrifying, right? Uncertainty, no one wants that. But you know what's scarier than the unknown? Spending your whole life forcing something that was never meant for you. I love to think about if I'm stuck in fear of making a change, I like to close up my eyes and think, what if I was in the exact same position a year from now? Would it be scarier that I had taken a leap, or would it be scarier that I was still standing on the precipice? And let me tell you, no one wants to be sitting on the precipice a year from now, right? What happens when you finally allow yourself to take that leap or jump, right? This is the payoff. Why do we do it? Why do we take the leap off and enjoy the free fall? One, you get your energy back. Instead of pouring everything into forcing something that isn't working, you free yourself up for something that is going to work, right? We have a limited amount of energy. And so when we continually dump it into things that no longer align with us, aren't really connected to our why anymore, right? Or people that no longer are connected to our why, we then don't have the energy for the things that are connected to us. What else happens when we make those big pivots? You stop fighting yourself. The constant battle of, but I said I would do this versus, but I don't actually want it anymore, that battle disappears, right? And these are the conversations that you have when you are solid, not when you are feeling tired. Because when you're feeling tired, you're always going to make the choice to do the thing that's easier, right? And this is where taking the time for yourself to step back and rejuvenate and not continuing to push, this is when you have those conversations, right? Number three, another thing that happens when you pivot is that you create space for what's right, new opportunities, new passions, new ways of being, things you never would have found if you stayed stuck in what was safe. So when I left school counseling 2.5 years ago, I did it because I was burned out. I did it because I really had nothing left to give in that moment. I came home and I slept for a month, which if you've ever heard me talk about burnout, I could talk about for days. But when I did that, it allowed me to have time and space to think, what do I want to do in this life? Where are my gifts? How do I want to help people? What do I want to do to help other people create the lives they want? And then it allowed me to open my coaching business. It allowed me to write books. It allowed me to start this podcast. And I would not have had the time or space to do that if I hadn't pivoted away from school counseling in the first place. And so, because of that, I met so many amazing people. I've been on such an amazing adventure in the last 2.5 years. And stepping away for that moment, or pivoting, if you will, to go with the language, created the energy and the space and the time to look at new things that I wouldn't have gotten to before. And in that moment, that happened due to burnout. But if I had been paying attention to myself and had created a way of taking care of myself in such a way that I was able to give myself reflection on a regular basis, I may not have needed to, burn down. I won't say burn down my career because now I'm back as a school counselor, but really to to do such a big drastic thing. Sometimes that's how it's supposed to go, but we don't always have to burn it down. We just have to be able to create space. right? And sometimes that space has to come from letting go of the things that no longer fit us or the people that no longer fit us, the activities, right? We have to create space because you can't keep stuffing things into a stuffed package, right? You have to take things out. Um, this is coming out in the springtime, and I always, in the spring, I'm sure everyone else feels this way, have this desire to get rid of a lot of things, right? And that's because I like the idea of creating space for the new as spring comes and grows, right? Think back on your own life, right? Think about a time when you finally let go of something that you had really just held on to for way too long, something that really needed to let go of that drained you, right? Did you get it? Now, what happens when you finally let that thing go? I'm willing to bet for 99% of you that as soon as you let that go, something else opened up, right? Maybe not immediately, maybe not the way you expected, but looking back, I bet you can see how releasing what wasn't meant for you made space for what was meant for you, right? And I know that releasing things can be terrifying because you have something. And then by releasing it, you sort of have dropped an anchor, right? And so we have this idea that we're going to be like floating up into space, right? Because you now don't have that anchor anymore. But you have to release the thing to create space for the next, right? I really want, as you walk into this next part of your life, I want you to think about the fact that you are allowed to change, right? You are allowed to change. You are allowed to grow beyond the plans that you made. You're allowed to want more. You're allowed to shift gears. You're allowed to try again. If anybody in your life makes you feel guilty about that, about evolving, about pivoting, about choosing a different path than the one that they expected you to choose, that's not your burden to carry, right? The people who succeed, they're not the ones who never change. They're the ones who pivot with purpose. They're the ones who see an obstacle and think, okay, time to adjust. What do I need to do to get over, around, under this obstacle? They're the ones who don't let pride keep them stuck in something that's clearly not working just because they don't want to admit that they need to shift. They don't see a pivot as failure. They see it as growth. And listen, even for somebody like me who makes a life helping people pivot, pivoting can be hard, right? For all of the same reasons that it's hard for everybody else who's watching or listening to this, right? Because you have to admit that something needs to change. You have to be okay if other people view you in a certain light. But, or and as I like to say, it also allows you to gain those pivoting muscles. The more that you let go of the fear of judgment, the more that you practice flexibility and moving through things and letting go of rigidity, right? The more that you allow yourself the agility to change direction, you're still heading in the same path. You just may need to change direction for a minute. The easier it gets to do it the next time an obstacle comes your way. And that right there is beautiful growth. So I really hope as you have listened to the season and listened to all of the talk about mindset that we've done, that this is what you have gained from this. If nothing else, know that you are allowed to grow and change. So here's your final challenge. You know, I like to give you homework. I want you to think of that area in your life that you feel stuck, where you're forcing something that doesn't fit anymore, where you're holding on to something, whether it's an idea, a goal, a plan, not because it feels right, but because you're afraid to let it go. Here's the real challenge. What's one step, just one that you can take this week to pivot towards something that feels more aligned? It doesn't need to be drastic. You don't need to quit your job. or make some huge change overnight. It may just be an honest conversation, right? It may be you admitting to yourself that something isn't working. Maybe it's letting go of guilt of wanting something different than you did 6 months ago. Ooh, that's a big one, right? Whatever it is, I want you to trust yourself enough to take that small pivot, right? When you give yourself permission to pivot, you open the door to everything you were actually meant for. And isn't that the point in all of it? So that's it. That's a wrap on this season. To every single one of you that showed up, thank you. For all of my guests who popped on, I am infinitely indebted to you. Thank you for being here with me. Thank you for growing with me. And most importantly, thank you for showing up for yourself. And as always, as you step back into your human journey, remember this week's unfiltered motivation from Notes from Your Coach, the power of the pivot. You've got this. And in case you need a reminder, you're a badass. Keep rocking it. Until next time, stay true, stay empowered, stay resilient, and remember the power of the pivot. If you want to find me, go to my website, notesfromyourcoach.com. All my info is there. You can jump on my newsletter, reach out, email me. I'm all over social, so find me that way as well. And I will see you next season. Always remember that you are your greatest asset. For more Notes from Your Coach with me, Queen of the Pivot, tune in every first and third Monday at 12 p.m. Pacific on Transformation Talk Radio. Each episode is chock full of unfiltered motivation to ignite your life and focuses on the tiny nugget of potent truth to empower you to take action and understand the power of the pivot. Share this show and share your journey using hashtag Notes from Your Coach. Subscribe and leave a review by visiting notesfromyourcoach.com.